Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to you, and from wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you once again for joining us today for episode 6 of our Inclusive Classroom series. So we're so excited to be here because we have a special guest with us today, but we're going to introduce ourselves and we're going to let him take over. So I am Teresa Castro.
Ricardo Recinos.
And we are both Tectosas from Hacienda La Puente. And is our friend here? There he is. Go ahead and introduce yourself and you can take over.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening all. My name is Gabriel Ward and I happen to be a teacher on special assignment with regards to mathematics in Hacienda La Puente Unified. And I'm excited to be able to share some of the stuff I constantly am learning. And I want to share some of the stuff that I've been learning this most recently with regards to mathematics for all learners or for all students. So let's go ahead and jump into it. One of the things we like to do when we talk about being in sessions for mathematics is to actually do math. So our first slide that we're going to jump into is a same different activity or routine. And I love working on these with students. And essentially what we're looking at are two different very much sides. And I'd like for you to consider how potentially might the image or the representation on the left side compare and contrast to the image on the right side. So those two overarching questions that I pose to students and that I'm posing to you now is how are these two things the same and or how are these two things different? And I'll give you a few seconds to process. And I'm not going to be able to call on anyone and to hear from you, but I will chime in with things I've done with students, but I want to let you give a chance to be able to think about it. How are they the same? How are they different? So I'll give you a few seconds. Now, when I do activities like this, sometimes students are afraid. They're unsure necessarily how to respond, what I'm looking for. And I tell them, this isn't necessarily have a right or wrong answer. As long as you can justify to me things that are the same, it works. I've had instances where kids see something like this and they say, they both have numbers. They're the same. Fabulous. Other instances where they're saying, well, you know what? They're different. And say, what do you mean? Say more about that. Oh, well, on one side, I can see that there's a number line. On the other side, I just see numbers. Okay, all right, I got it. Well, one side might have an answer and the other side doesn't, so it's different. And then we might go a little bit further. Hopefully, I would hope some kids can have conversations about the representation on the left. I noticed that it's jumping. And we talk about, well, how many jumps are happening? In this case, we can see, there's a total of 4 in total jumps. So we could think of that as 4 groups. How much is each group jumping? In this case, 4 groups of 3. And let's contrast that with the other representation on the side. The other representation multiplication equation, if we wanted to go there, is 3 times 4. So we can have conversations centered around, the commutative property of multiplication. Are these the same? Well, the answers are the same, but in essence, what they are showing me is a little bit different in terms of how they're saying, how many groups of versus 4 groups of versus 3 groups of when we talk about multiplication equation. And we'll learn a little bit more about this because, again, these are beautiful tasks that I love working with students because, again, there's not really a right or wrong answer, and there's so many different ways that kiddos can get into the mathematics conversation. So thanks for humoring me if you were doing some math alongside us, but let's go ahead and jump into what our goals are for today's session now that we've had a little bit of math under our belt. So really, it's just two things we're trying to focus in our brief short time together. The first is to be able to explore some math research. We want to dig into what are people out there saying, what are they studying, what are they finding, so that we can make sure we're, making sure we're doing what's right by students. And then the next one is to engage in some low floor, high ceiling tasks. Now, you just engaged in one if you did some math with me there, and we'll do a few more throughout the course of our time together. So again, those 2 goals are what we're trying to get through. Let's make sure we do our best to adhere to those. So I want to have this quote for you. This comes to us courtesy of the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, NCTM. And for many of us, we consider it the major book in terms of what a lot of us base most of our decision-making on, and that's the principles to action. So I'll give you a moment to read that to yourself. And I did a little bit of liberty of highlighting some words. Those are some things that kind of stand out to me. And things that we really want to make sure when we're trying to consider what is effective math teaching, it's going to encompass those things. It's going to involve some mathematical reasoning. It's going to have some problem solving. It's going to have multiple entry points, something we just kind of experienced hopefully in that first problem or first task. and varied solution strategies. And that's one of the things I love about math, is that there are more than one way necessarily to go about it. There's not always one only way of doing mathematics. I had the privilege and honor of attending a math conference over the weekend, and I was geeking out at all the different ways that some of the people within the room were approaching some of the same problems. So just kind of almost unlocking your brain to seeing varied solution strategies. So now that you've seen that, let's do some more math. This next task I have for us is a little bit of a higher level in terms of the grade level content, but I'm pretty sure regardless of whether you're a kindergarten teacher or a high school teacher, you can be able to spot some of those similarities and differences. This is another one of those same difference. So I'm going to go ahead and let you take a look at this. And I want you to be mindful of how is the representation on the left, how is that matching up with a representation on the right? Now, I've done tasks similar to this, and sometimes people kind of are a little taken aback. Oh my goodness, we're looking at this graph or this chart and a bunch of numbers coming my way, but we try and see where we can find some connections. So if I were to ask students, how are these the same or how are they different? I'd like to believe that some of them can spot the similarities of, they're different because they're talking about two different people. And I say, what do you mean about that? Oh, well, on one side, we can see it says Jamal, where on the other side, we see we're talking about Kendra. Okay, got it. We're talking about two individuals. Is there anything else we could add to that? Hopefully some students could say, oh, well, they both have distance. And I'm talking about distance. Where do you see distance in both of these? Oh, on one of the columns, it says distance. And then if I look over there on the graph or on the chart, I can see on that one side where it says distance. So we're finding some commonalities in terms of these two representations. And we can push more. Hopefully some of the kiddos might say, well, I can see that they're talking about time. So it's a relationship. How does distance compare or relate to that of time? Now on the left-hand side, I'm hoping that kids are going to be able to see what's happening after someone travels some distance. They've traveled for a certain amount of time. So in 26 minutes, Jamal has traveled 4 miles. How about over here in that other graph or chart? What about Kendra? Is she doing more? Is she doing less? And how do we know? And so these are the types of activities and tasks that I don't think are necessarily pigeonholed or isolated to one particular grade level. Now, granted, they match obviously certain concepts. So if it's something that you're talking about or something that you're learning, that might lend themselves. But I think that this can be applicable to a lot of different grades. I can see myself using this in a middle school classroom as well as high school classroom. And even though I know that many of us here, or myself included, kind of center more around elementary, I can automatically spot some of the similarities and differences myself. And so this is really just going back to that idea, which isn't novel, that idea of thinking about Venn diagrams. How are things the same? How are things different? And so the same different routine is one of my favorites because I would say that it's able to give kids a lot of access. They can enter into the conversation and there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. We're looking more for those justifications. Now, when we talk about doing tasks like this, we talk about engaging in problem solving and reasoning. I think one of the things we have to really, truly be mindful of is the fact that none of this really works if you will have an opportunity to establish this, and that's a community. We talk about how it is really important for kids to be willing to take risks, for kids to be willing to think. You know, if they rely solely on the teacher to tell them not only what to do, but also how to think, we aren't necessarily doing our job as teachers to build that strong sense of a community. We have to value and appreciate all learners. And we have to believe that every single person in the classroom brings something to the table, whether it be our kiddos who really excel at math or some of our kiddos who may have a challenging time. Every single person can contribute something to the conversation. And I want to make sure we understand that that only happens if we develop that sense of community. So here we have some things that talk about cultivating those communities of learners. One of the things we want to make sure is that we're valuing all students' thinking. Sometimes people think, I'm not a math person, when I always try to make sure they understand all of us are a math person. It's really not that hard to be a math person. 2 things, 1, be a person, and 2, do math, right? Next, students have autonomy in choosing their methods. So we want to make sure they have these different approaches, these ways of going about it, where I could go this way and someone else may go a different way. This next one to me is really crucial, and it's the idea of mistakes. I think when we think about language arts, we think about writing, we always have this idea of it's okay to create a rough draft, a brainstorm, if you will, and we're going to revise it and fix it so that eventually it becomes more of a finished final draft for us, or a final product. But in mathematics, all too often, kids are so overly concerned with getting the right answer. Am I wrong? Did I make a mistake? Let me go ahead and erase that. We really want to encourage the idea of, you know what? Mistakes are great. We learn from them. In fact, I go to sometimes classrooms and I applaud the mistakes in the class, and kids are looking at me like I'm nuts. And I say, you're not. I'm not. I am a little bit off, but I'm not completely crazy. We want to make sure you understand that when you make a mistake, maybe other people in the classroom are thinking the same thing and they were just too timid or afraid to say it. So we want to make sure they understand it's okay to be wrong. We can learn and grow from that. That goes back to, as many of us know, the growth mindset. And then the last one I think is huge, which is to say, as the teacher, we're not the all-knowing being and that person who knows everything. We make mistakes. We can be vulnerable. We have to understand that the kiddos can, at any time, basically think that, am I right or am I wrong? And that comes to them being able to kind of evaluate and go through it. I've been in some classrooms, and even classrooms where I've had the privilege and honor of stepping in, and kids are asking me, am I right? Am I wrong? Can you look at this? And I tell them, you know, it doesn't have to just be me. I'm not the only person in the classroom. Talk to another colleague, talk to someone next to you, see what they're thinking. I want kiddos to do a little bit more of the sense making and the reasoning, so that in terms of what is being expected of them is more on their shoulders rather than always just coming from us as the teacher. So these are just some big things. And again, I can't stress that enough. It goes back to, if they don't feel that they have that strong sense of community, everything else isn't necessarily going to work out the way we want. Now, this last year and a half really has been a little bit nuts and crazy. And so we've had a chance to dig into a lot of research. In fact, Great Public Schools has produced some research to be able to support, when we talk a lot about this unfinished learning, what are the things that as teachers, as educators, we can best do to support and meet the needs of all of our students? Now, they have this, came out last year in 2020, this book called Addressing Unfinished Learning article. And in it, they really break down 6 really recommended principles. Now, these first 3 we aren't going to linger too much on. Essentially, it's just talking about understanding and knowing what we should be teaching within the classroom, right? We're going to instead focus on some additional rest of this, if you will, really specifically looking at number 4 and number 6. So again, there are 6 principles in total. What we're going to be spending our bulk of our time on with regards to this is 4 and 6. So that first one, it's the inclusion of each and every learner. Now, when we say that, so many different ways we can go about it, but let's just focus on 2 things. So there's 2 instructional approaches that really have proven to be extremely effective, not only for increasing engagement, but also increasing the learning within classrooms. And that first one is UDL, and that second one is CRI. So let's go ahead and take a look at UDL. And that's not probably new or novel, we understand, but it's the idea of universal design for learning. And when I think about universal design for learning, to me, first and foremost, I think about giving kids options, giving them choice, right? This graphic here that we can see really breaks it down into 3 sections. You have engagement, you have representation, and you have action and expression. Now, what does that mean for the mathematics classroom, right? Things that I'm thinking when we talk about UDL for mathematics, it could be making sure everyone in the classroom gets choices. Meaning we're giving them opportunities. Are they going to display or demonstrate their learning through technology? Are they going to show me their learning with manipulatives? Is it going to be with a representation? Are we going to give more opportunities for turn and talk so that we're not isolating kiddos and putting them on the spot, if you will? Are we going to give kids an opportunity to be able to present their solution or their strategies or various ways of thinking about things? And we're going to give students opportunities to be able to show their thinking, whether it be verbally show their thinking, writing it down, or maybe even constructing something. So when we think about UDL, again, I go back to that idea of giving kids an opportunity for choice. Some things that I'd like to leave you with. When you think about UDL, questions you might ask yourself. How can the environment in my classroom be made more accessible for all learners? How can routines and norms be made more accessible for all? How can engagement in problem solving be more accessible to all? And how can strategic thinking be made more accessible to all? That's not to say that we're going to have all the answers on the spot, but just things to kind of prime our brain to get us thinking so that we're ensuring we're addressing one of those key approaches when we talk about making sure it's accessible for all learners. Now, the other approach they talked about was the idea of CRA. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar, CRA refers to the idea of thinking of things concretely. Talk about concrete, we're talking about manipulatives, we're talking about the hands-on. Could be for high school or middle school, the idea of working with algebra tiles. For elementary, it could be the idea of using base 10 blocks or using fraction tiles, or even if we're talking about little small pieces when we talk about thinking about base 10 frames. That next category, if you think of that floating island there, is for the idea of the pictorial representational. It's drawings. It's giving an opportunity to be able to draw or sketch out really quickly what I'm thinking, what I'm understanding. And that last one over there, sitting on that island, is the abstract world. That's more so your opportunities for kiddos to engage with algorithms, the traditional math as some people refer it. And one of the things we have to be mindful as our roles as mathematics educators is to ensure we're doing our utmost ability to help kids see the connections. Because I think, unfortunately, for some kids, when they think of any one of those things, it's, oh, okay, we did concrete. We were working with those manipulatives a few weeks ago when we were talking about, for example, let's say it was adding and subtracting when we group with numbers. And then eventually, yeah, we drew some pictures when we were talking about the adding and regrouping. But then when we were doing the algorithm, that was something completely separate. As teachers, our goal should be able to find some of those commonalities. How are some of those connections so that we can make those bridges, if you will, so that students don't think of each of these things in isolation. They don't see them as separate, completely different things, but rather, what are some of these connections happening? When we were trading some of those 1s for 10s, where do you see that happening with your picture and your representation? Or when you were trading for some of those 1s for 10s, when we talk about our base 10 blocks, where do you see that happening in our algorithm? Again, trying to make those connections for students is really going to help further their understanding and deepen truly what they understand. Now, before I move away from this, one of the things I've encountered all too often is teachers tell me, I get it. We have to get them from the concrete over to the abstracted. Once they get there, they've made it. They've mastered math for that particular concept. And I say, no, we want to make sure kiddos are comfortable in moving at any one of the particular junctures. In fact, I would say sometimes I've experienced in the classroom when kiddos are very comfortable with the abstract, they've mastered that procedure, they got it down, and they're working it out, crunching those numbers, if you will. They may not feel comfortable moving at any of the other junctures. And I would say for that particular student, they don't have a deep understanding of the math. So I think it's imperative that we understand it's not so to say that they have to get to the abstract, that they have to get to that end. It's important that they understand each of those various representations or each of those things and see those connections. That's really our goal. Now, one of the things I really say when I look at this is helpful is sometimes it helps to go back a step. If I'm working with a student and I had this happen while my opportunity when I was subbing the other day, kiddos were able to add and subtract with decimals. They could use the algorithm, right? But when I asked them to show me, what does that 10th look like? Could you draw it for me? It was very much a challenge for them. So I would encourage you to think if kiddos are stuck maybe with any particular concept, it's okay to jump back or move back a step. Maybe they couldn't draw it. Let's go ahead and bust out some of those base 10 blocks. Let's make sure they can touch it, they can feel it, they can make better sense of it, okay? So I just think that understanding the CRA or the CPA is truly important because it doesn't matter whether you're working in kindergarten or in the later grade levels. It's always important for kiddos to understand these various places. And as our job as educators is to help kids make those connections so that they don't see them as isolated islands. Now, this is a quote that comes to us from Rachel Lambert. If you haven't had a chance to dig into any of her research, I would really encourage you to do so. She's done some groundbreaking stuff centered around students with learning disabilities. And I'll read her quote for you. It says, "How can students with a learning disability construct positive mathematical identities with access only to procedural learning?" So one of the things that she's found through her extensive research is that students with learning disabilities and even kiddos who are dubbed low achieving mathematics, they are offered usually more procedural mathematics when compared to their peers. And what that means is what they perceive math to be is that of crunching numbers, that of completing procedures, that of doing step one, doing step two, doing step three. And that kind of undermines the beauty and the joy of mathematics. So we want to make sure that all learners are given opportunities to gauge and enrich tasks, that all kiddos are given opportunities to be able to problem solve, to be able to reason. We want to make sure that they're building that positive math identity because we talk a lot about math and I'll be honest, not too many people really love it just as much as I do. And I think that that's because culturally, we haven't always really pushed for people to have a positive math identity. How many times have you heard people say, oh, I'm not a math person? And to me, I say, as I said earlier, if you're a person and you're doing math, you're a math person. You may not love it as much as someone else, but you are a math person. So we want to make sure that we don't focus purely on the memorization. We want to focus on some of those other key things of what being a mathematician is. All right. Talking about that last one, we said there were 6 principles. Here's the next one I think is really big, is basically focusing on those commonalities. Rather than key in on the differences, let's see what are some things that I can do to support the needs of my language learners and also support the needs of my students with learning disabilities. It's almost like, are we focusing on this? Are we focusing on that? What should we really be talking about? And sometimes there's an overlap. When I'm trying to talk about what's going to help my kiddos that are second language learners, I'm doing what's best for all of my students regardless. So let's go ahead and look at some of that overlap here. And I think this visual will help with that. And that's to say, whether you're supporting students with learning disabilities or whether you're supporting English language learners, there's a few things that kind of overlap that regardless of those subgroups, these things are going to be helpful for all. I'm going to address 3 real fast. The first one is context. Speak to a lot of teachers and they don't understand why is it that we have so many word problems in a lot of the either curriculum or a lot of the math expectations that we're doing. And it goes back to context. Context matters. We want kids to have something to fall back on, and we want to make sure they understand the situation of whatever it is we're talking about. Next one, multisensory learning experiences. We want to give them opportunities to see, I would say, multiple representations and different ways to interact with the math. We just saw that visual earlier with the CRA and how important it is to give kiddos access to those various avenues of math. We can make sure we give them those different ways of seeing and doing. And then the next one I want to highlight here is the opportunity to use language. I think that that's really, for me, really crucial. We talk a lot about the idea of kiddos needing chances to speak during math class. If math class for me is me going in as the teacher and telling students, here's how we're going to do it, showing them what we're going to do, and then expecting them to either take notes or for them to do the math, and without giving them opportunities to engage in mathematical conversations, we're doing them a huge disservice. As much as possible, I encourage you to amplify the mathematical conversations. It could be as simple as a turn and talk. It could be as simple as, hey, you guys are working on this page together. Let's go ahead and compare what you got. What did they get? Do your answers match up? If you disagree, why? Or it could even be having some whole group conversations. If you recall, we already did 2 small of those same difference. Those are excellent opportunities for kiddos to be able to converse with one another, to be able to share their ideas whole group. You're really amplifying the discourse in your classroom, and that's not only going to help your English language learners, it's going to help all of your learners because they're being able to engage not only in the mathematical language, the terminology, but also in that important argumentation. Here's why you're wrong in a respectful manner, or here's why I'm right. That's really crucial, especially when we talk about understanding the 8 mathematical practice standards, and even thinking about as we prepare students for success on the end of the year state assessments, there are areas that they're graded upon that involve the argumentation, the critiquing the reasoning of others. So again, rather than focusing on all of our subgroups, focusing on those things that really are going to address multiple things with what we're trying to get to. Now I have another task for you. Our next math problem here, if you will, involves which one doesn't belong. And for some of you, you may have seen it before. I always go back to Sesame Street and the one of these is not like the other. Essentially, we're looking for, of these 4 various representations, which of them is a little bit different or doesn't go with the rest. Let me go ahead and show that. Give you a few seconds to make sense of it. Again, we're looking at 4 separate things. We got A, B, C, D, 4 corners, if you will. And I'm asking you to think about which of these 4 corners do you think doesn't necessarily belong with the rest? And when you're thinking about that, have your why. I'll give you a few moments. All right, I have done this activity and task in some classrooms, and some of the things that I've heard students say automatically, right away, D doesn't belong. And of course I say why. You can't just tell me an answer, you got to justify. D doesn't belong because it's numbers and everything else has pictures or drawings, and D is the only one with numbers. Okay, I accept it. Thanks for sharing. Is there anyone else that has a different idea? And then we might see, does anyone have another thing to chime in with? And if they don't, because this sometimes happens, too afraid, I say, well, I may be thinking it's C. Why do you think I would say C? And then they try to think, well, I don't know, but let's see what he be thinking for his answer for C. And we're trying to pull different answers. Now, if you haven't already seen this yet, there's definitely some connections. When we talk about understanding decimals, which is a tough concept for some, we want to make sure they kind of make connections to things they might know. And for me, I think a lot of us can easily relate to money, right? And so we can see when we look at the upper left-hand corner with A, I see $2 bills. Those two could be my wholes, kind of like when we look at the actual symbolic form of the number 2.15 or 2 and 1500ths. The 2 is the 2 there. Wait a minute, do you see 2 anywhere else? Or is that the only place that you see 2? We could talk about, oh, well, no, I see 2 flats or 2 of those 10 by 10 rectangles or squares. Okay, awesome, great. Do you see, what about in C? Do you see 2 there? And hopefully we can draw out, well, the fact there's 10 dimes in that first group at the top in C. And then there's 10 more dimes in the bottom group in C. So 10 dimes or 10 groups of 10 is the equivalent of $1. So I can see 2 $1 there in C. So we're trying to help, again, going back to that idea of connections, we're trying to get kids to see the connections in these various representations. And I love it because when I do these with students, they're always going to ask me at the end when we're all done, who was right, Mr. Ward? You heard all our answers, but which of us was correct? And I tell them, well, let's think about it. For the person who said D and they said that it was only with numbers, were they right? Was D the only one with numbers? Well, yeah, I guess they were. What about the person who said A with the only one that had 2 $1 bills? Is A the only one with $2 bills? Well, yeah. So they get to the idea of there isn't a right answer. And I know all too often in math there is, but I try to give them opportunities to engage in this because I'm trying to engage them in some conversations. I'm trying to get them to see those connections. So these which one doesn't belong activities, really enjoy working with. Now, what we just engaged in so far was a low floor, high ceiling task. It was not only a low floor, high ceiling task with that which one doesn't belong, it was a low floor, high ceiling task with what we had seen earlier with the same different. And really these tasks, these low floor, high ceiling, they're really giving access to all students. Why? Think of those 3 things at the bottom. They have multiple entry points. There isn't only one way to kind of start it. They have different solutions. There's different ways of going about it. And that last one, they have multiple presentations. That's huge. We want to get kids to see those connections in those multiple representations. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, low floor, high ceiling, I don't understand what you're talking about. Hopefully this will help. So we think about what is a high flooring, high ceiling task? Well, high flooring, high ceiling, it means it's complicated. You don't necessarily know what you're doing, but it has a lot of potential in terms of how far we can take the math. For this case, yeah, kids are probably going to be frustrated. They're probably going to be intimidated. And a lot of times they're not able to start. But when I think about some of those other tasks, I tell them, don't be afraid. There's not a wrong answer. You could even say there's money in a lot of these. That's starting the conversation. Okay, so high floor, high ceiling, not what we want. What about high floor? Oh, sorry. What about the idea of making a connection to something we know? Think about the game of chess. Chess is a high floor, high ceiling. It's got a lot of rules, right? It's not something you can just maybe have one of your kiddos or youngest learners be able to engage with. You got to know, what does this do? The queen moves this many spaces, or the rook moves this many spaces. Now, obviously, there's a lot of thinking. We can take it deep, but it has a high floor, so it's harder to start in that task, or in this case, that game. What about low floor, high ceiling? Low floor, low ceiling. So it has a low floor. It's not complicated. I can get access into it, but I can't take it very far. Think about things like, right, tic-tac-toe. It doesn't have a high floor. It's very low, but it also has a low ceiling. There isn't too much thinking involved. It's only put an X here, put an O there. Only so many ways you can take it. What about a low floor, high ceiling, which is, again, this is what we want here. We're saying that there's a lot of room. We're addressing for some of our kiddos who are struggling to gain access into the mathematics conversation, but we're also accounting for some of our kiddos who already have a good grasp on the particular concept. So think about this. How can we potentially lower the floor and at the same time raise the ceiling? When I think about that, those are the types of tasks we want more of. Things that kiddos can start with and have a lot more places that you can take it. Have another one which doesn't belong. This one I've enjoyed working with students, and I'm not going to let you think too much on this. I will share some of the feedback I've heard. When I got this task with students, one of the first things I hear from them is automatically, oh, totally, it has to be C. And I bet you can consider why they might say that. It's because C is the only one with numbers, of course. And then I have other instances where kids say, no, it's got to be B. And I'm like, what do you mean B? And they're like, well, Mr. Ward, if you look at all the other ones, B is the only one that has more than one whole. And we get to some conversations if we wanted to take it there. Fractions greater than 1. What do you mean B's more than one whole? Well, see that circle over there, that blue one in C? It's all the way shaded. So you have one whole and a little more. So we can talk about that. Some kids, and I kid you not, we've had conversations centered around equivalent fractions. When we talk about, ooh, there are 2 out of how many parts here that are shaded? 2 out of a total of 6. Oh, okay. What about this? You have 1 out of 3. And they're saying that that's the same. What do you mean those are the same? Oh, because if you were to split each one of these thirds, a little line to separate them, you would really have, in essence, sixths. So those thirds potentially are the same thing as 6. So these are the types of tasks that I really love working with students because, again, they are low floor, high ceiling. Some of my kiddos might say, oh, that's the only one that's not colored blue. Maybe that's the only thing they can contribute at that moment in time, but they at least have a space and a place to be able to contribute. So I love these which one doesn't belong. There is a website if you're interested in getting more of these types of tasks, which one doesn't belong, WODB. But you can definitely, sometimes I've made a lot of these on my own. And I just think they're fabulous because I'm able to truly get some more from students that I may otherwise not have gotten. So I wanted to show this. I don't want to dig too deep into it, but this is some more research that's been done. And they really tried to look at the effect size of some of these different things. They were trying to focus on, okay, if we're focusing on what's working for not only our kiddos who are struggling, but also for our kiddos who have maybe that fall underneath the umbrella of special education, here are some of the things that have shown or proven to work best for them. Now, I know right away, if you're looking at this, you say, whew, I'm looking for the bigger numbers because I want to make sure it has a larger effect size. And absolutely, you're right. One of the biggest ones, if you didn't already notice, is with regards to systemic and explicit instruction. And I do believe that that is invaluable. I think that it definitely has its place. But let's focus on some of those other things that are also proven to be effective. One of the things that I think is big is the idea of making sure we're using visual and graphic depictions. Visuals are huge when we talk about multiple representations. Think alouds. We want to give chances for kids to be able to express themselves. How did they approach that problem? What were they thinking when they solved it these various ways? Also, the idea of being able to account for students working with other students and helping each other out. I think that that's big. I know the time we think about that idea of that Charlie Brown teacher where it's wah, 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 wah. Kiddos really have benefiting from being able to work together and hear and share their various ways of thinking. So again, this is something that I think is helpful. If you wanted more information around this, you could check out what I provided here, which is that research provided by Mathematics Instruction for Students with Learning Disabilities or Difficulty Learning Mathematics, a guide for teachers. So I don't want to linger too much on this, but one of the things I wanted to make sure is because I think what happens is people kind of get pigeonholed into the idea that math has to only be purely that of explicit instruction. And so when I think about that, I want to make sure we're also being mindful, what does other groups say? And that's just this, which is it's important to note that there's no evidence supporting that explicit instruction is the only way for kiddos with learning disabilities. That yes, it may be effective, and yes, it may be one form, but there's other things that also work. Some of the things they talked about is the idea that this myth emerges that there's only one way of going about it, which is let me show you how to do this. But inquiry math, which has really gained a lot of traction, has proven to give opportunities for kids to be able to explore, for them to be able to see the patterns, for them to learn the math themselves, rather than purely just being shown what and how to do. So we could take it so much further, especially from that research alone, but I just wanted to kind of get our feet wet and hopefully get everyone, hopefully a little more understanding that, you know, there's a lot of research out there, and that if we're really truly trying to make sure we're being inclusive of all learners, to me, one of the quickest and the least way that you might be able to do that is to be able to implement some low floor, high ceiling tasks, whether it be things like our same different, or whether it be things like which one doesn't belong. There are others out there, but just as much as possible, give kids access to the math, allow them to engage so that we can include more learners. That's it for now.
So again, thank you so much, Gabriel, for joining us. We learned so much, but we're going to go ahead and continue on this topic. So Ricardo, if you're ready, we can go ahead and share. All right, so we're going to continue with more math, and we saw our objective here. Just as always in this whole inclusive classroom series, we want to discover ways this time to make math instruction accessible to all students, right? Our tools that we're going to use today, Gabriel already talked about math research and the low floor, high ceiling task. And now we're going to continue with inclusive math tools in OneNote and Math Solver mobile app, and also math quizzes via forms. So let's go ahead and get started, Ricardo.
Sure. So we're really excited. I'm not a math teacher, but I want to make sure that you are aware of these tools that are available to you and also to your students, because as I was looking at them, I can see the potential for our students to be able to benefit and to use them. So the first thing that I want to show you is that we all have Microsoft Office 365. And once you log in, it usually takes you here. And if you did not know, you have the ability to go to OneNote. So if you click on it, it's going to take you to OneNote, and I have it open already. And by default, I just created a page and I called it Math, okay? And what I want you to show you is that you have the ability in here to come and draw, okay? And I'm just gonna draw a simple problem, and I'm just gonna go maybe, let me go ahead and click on the pen, blue, and let me go ahead and draw. Maybe I'll do 3x plus 2 equals, let's see, just a simple one, 8. Okay, hopefully it's going to recognize my writing. But once that I've done that, notice that in here on OneNote, you have something that is called Math right here, okay? So I'm going to click on it, okay? And it's going to show you some options right here, what you need to do, okay? So I wrote the equation, okay? So after I've done that, I can come in here and I can use my marquee select tool over here and select the equation that I wrote. Just to give an example how this works, okay? I'm going to select it. It's going to select the entire equation that I wrote. And now I have the option to click on this math icon right here. So let me click on it. And when I do that, it's going to take it and it's going to OCR it. It's going to take it, they call it what from, I think it's ink recognition, right? So I took it and actually put it in here. If it doesn't do it the exact way that you wrote it, you can go ahead and fix it. But notice that it actually did a pretty good job with that, okay? So now I can tell it, I have a couple of options, okay? And here, I can solve for X, I can graph both sides on 2D, and I can graph in 2D if I wanted to. Let me just ink it to math so you can see that that's going to switch when I do that, okay? And now let me show you what I can do. I wanted to solve for X. So this is going to actually solve it for me. And we're not saying that the students are going to use this all the time, because you can actually take it and have it. Well, let's just do this, okay? I'm having problems with quadratic equations, maybe. That's an example, right? And I'll go ahead and ink something, and I solve it. And what I want you to see in here that is I have the ability to show the steps for how this was solved, okay? But I also have the ability to generate a practice quiz. So Forms and OneNote understands this problem, and I'm going to show you this first so we can go back to the steps, okay? I'm going to show you this first. Understands this problem, and I can say, you know what? I want to practice more problems like this, okay? So I'm going to generate a practice quiz. So notice that I'm going to click on it, and it's going to say, okay, let's add a practice, okay? Let's sign in, and all of us have an account, including our students. So it's going to sign me in and say, how many questions do you want to practice with? So how about if we, as a student, I want to practice that particular type of math problem and create 5 questions. Notice what it's going to do for us. I said 5 questions. It's going to know what type of math problem this is, and it's going to create, hey, Ricardo, here it is. Here are problems that are very similar to the one that your teacher gave you. And now I can actually come in here. I love it. Immersive Reader is right here. So if our students needed a help with Immersive Reader to read the question, to understand it, to maybe translate to a different language, they have the ability to do that. I am going to just, for the sake of time, I'm going to probably just guess, okay? So I'm just going to guess my first one, okay? Let's go ahead. Teresa, do you have a wild guess on this one?
Oh, you have to give me like 5 minutes, but which we don't have. I can't see it from my screen.
I'm gonna look like I don't know, like I don't know anything about math, but I'm just gonna guess so you can see it, okay? So let's go ahead and do this one. I don't know. Let's go that one, okay? But notice that the problems are very similar to my main problem that my teacher gave me, okay? So let's go ahead and put this one right here, okay? I picked 5 problems, if you remember, okay? And let's do this one over here. And let's just pick that, okay? And now I can say submit my quiz, okay? This is not being graded. It's not as a grade. It's just for me to practice, okay? And it's going to submit the quiz, and hopefully we'll give it some time. I should go back, okay? And I can view results, okay? And I want you to notice that it's going to tell me what I did right or what I did wrong, okay? So pretty incredible to be able to see this, okay? I was able to practice based on that problem that my teacher gave me. Did you want to add anything to this, Teresa?
So what you're saying is the teacher didn't have to do anything.
The teacher did not have to do anything. They provided that particular problem, and after that, OneNote and Microsoft Forms created a practice quiz for us to be able, for that student to be able to practice the same concepts when it comes to mathematics.
I want to see the steps, please.
Yes. So notice that we had that problem that we ink, okay? And we solve for x, right? I can show you by showing the steps. Notice what it's going to do for us. It's going to tell the students how this was done. So if a student was stuck with this particular problem, this was a simple one, but it was going to tell them exactly how it was solved, okay? How they got to that solution, basically, okay? And don't forget, Microsoft is all about inclusivity. So notice that over here, we have the immersive reader. So let's say that I was a student that doesn't speak English and I don't understand this. I mean, even if I speak English, I can have this read to me.
Steps for solving linear equation. Subtract 2 from both sides.
So it will show me the steps, but just to go really fast, because we cover immersive reader, I can come over here and say, you know what? I want to see this in Spanish because I still don't control English. So let me just go to Spanish, okay? Just for extra support for that particular student, okay? Here we go. I want the whole document, and now I have the same problem and the steps to solve it
Pasos para resolver ecuaciones lineales.
in Spanish. And I have the instructions on how to solve that problem in English, along with my language that I know how to use right now. So just a quick idea of how you can use OneNote to just find out how to solve a problem in case you're stuck, but also practice that particular concept of math using OneNote quizzes via form. Okay.
And I know what some teachers are thinking. Some teachers are thinking, oh no, I don't want to show this to my students. They're never going to do math problems on their own. They're just going to have this thing solve it. So, I mean, that is a management piece too, right? We want them to be able to learn how to solve it on their own. But if they get stumped or if they need to be able to check their own work, this is a great resource, right, Ricardo?
And as a teacher, when you create the OneNote, you have an ability to create what they're called digital notebooks for the students, where you can have the ability to turn this math feature on or off.
On and
So
off.
if you wanted it on for them to study that concept and to practice that concept, you turn it on. And if you want it off because you want them to solve it on their own, you basically just turn it off. So just kind of a great tool to have and to be able to allow our students to practice. Okay. So that was the first one that we wanted to cover. There's also Microsoft is just incredible when it comes to accessibility. They have a new tool, and I wanted to show you this, and hopefully I can go to it. Let me show you. So this is available on iOS and it's also available on Android. I have an Android phone, so I went ahead and downloaded the app. It's called Math Solver. So let me just show you. I'm going to click on it. Okay. Quiz available. I'll show you what that is. Very similar to what we just did. But what I want you to see is that I'm going to take this particular app and I'm going to just point it at a problem that I have right here. Okay. And I'm going to take a picture. Hopefully it's going to read it. I think that should be okay right there. And notice that it read my problem right there. If you can see, okay? And I can go and say, you know what? I want to look at the graph if I want to, okay? And
I'd rather use this one.
And I can see my graph. I can visualize it if I want to, okay? I can go back. I also have the ability, if you notice, view solution steps, which we had before. Okay,
wow.
We have the ability to use our immersive reader. If you remember the icon for immersive reader, it's available right there. The same tools that we had before, we have available right here. In addition to that, let me go ahead and do that again so you can see it, okay? Because I want to make sure that you see. I'll do a different problem. So it's using OCR to do this. And if it didn't copy it correctly, you can use the pencil and kind of come in here and do it. But what I wanted to show you is I'll give you a quiz for you. If you wanted to create a quiz similar to how we had a second ago, it also will give you videos on problems similar to this to reinforce. So basically, independent math exploration. Our students are taking control of their own learning, okay? Related concepts, worksheets, and everything is available right here. So I just think, and then you can also share this if you wanted to with other students, with classmates, and so on and so on. So I wanted to make sure that you saw that. We also have the ability, if maybe I had the equation written on the paper, I can come in here, just kind of click, take the picture. It's going to recognize it. Notice what it did. And we have the same ability. We can solve for x. We can step using quadratic formula, completing the square, and also showing the steps of how this was solved. Okay. We have the graph right there. Let me go back so you can see this. Okay. Let me go in here. Now, let me do the picture again. I just want you to see it one more time. I just turn the camera on. Let me click the picture. Okay. And then in here, I know I have the ability to do the quizzes. And I think you saw it a second ago. I can come in here and I can say quiz. Okay. It's going to generate a quiz with me with the same concepts that I'm going to do. Let's just do 5 questions. And it's going to tell me you're going to have 5 to 10 minutes to complete. Okay. So I'm just practicing this particular concept of mathematics. I'm going to go in there and it's going to give me the problems. And again, notice what it has. You know what? I'm not really sure how this is going to be solved. And I know Teresa's not sure how this will be solved either. But notice that in the bottom, we have help me. Okay. Well, give me a hint. Okay. Just so you know. And as I complete. Okay. Check. Next problem. I probably got it wrong. Again, the help me button is always there. And I'm just showing you. And I'm going to look awful when it comes to math. Ooh, I got that one right. Look, I guessed right, Teresa. Yeah, I'm
I
just
feel
going
a
through
little
them.
bit insulted that you thought that I wouldn't, but it's okay.
No, I think I just thought we were both in the same boat when it came to this. But let me show you. I got that one right. But no, let me show you what it did. It's going to take me my score. It's going to tell me the time I spent. That's pretty good, Speedy. Good job. Okay. And I also have the ability to see a full report of how I did in this particular quiz. And if I go back, I can finish. And it's going to remember how I've been doing in all of my quizzes. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this is available in OneNote and also on the app that is called Math Solver via Android and iOS. So just a couple of tools that we wanted to make sure that you were aware that are available for our students and for you to use.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
So let's say I have a struggling student, and of course, this is something that students can do for themselves. They can create this quiz on their own. When they're done, can they take a screenshot and maybe send it to me?
Yes,
To,
definitely. So they will be able
show
to
me
just
that they have like done this work on their own. Okay, just wondering.
definitely they're able to do that. They're able to come in here. They're able to practice. Again, the immersive reader included in here. Any math problem that they want to use is just a great tool by just going to draw and being able to use the math tool in
And on the
OneNote.
phone too.
And on the
right?
phone too,
Yeah,
with the
cool.
math solver. So just a couple of tools that we think are available for our students that are very, very powerful. But these tools with immersive reader and with the ability to read the steps and with the ability to practice those mathematical concepts, we think are just great for our students and also for our teachers.
Is that all, Mr. Isinos? Was there
That's
more?
all I have.
Again, we want to thank our guest speaker today, Mr. Gabriel Ward, and thank you, Ricardo, for sharing those great resources. And we know we have a lot of math teachers who have been requesting some special things just for them. So this was just for you. And hopefully you found something useful to be able to use these math tools for all your learners in your inclusive classroom. So thank you again for joining us, everybody, and enjoy your weekend.